On Guadalcanal, plans didn't fail because they were wrong. They failed because reality was wet. January 13th, 1943. A ridgeline the Americans nicknamed Galloping Horse. A battalion stuck at the base, taking fire from above, bleeding time and men they couldn't replace. Then Captain Charles Willis Davis starts uphill. He's not a career soldier in the way men imagine war heroes. He's a law student, a quiet, methodical mind trained to win arguments, now asked to win a ridge. He raises his rifle, he squeezes the trigger, and nothing happens. A jam. The smallest mechanical refusal imaginable. 7 pounds of steel that simply says, no. That's the real moment of command. Not when orders are given. When the weapon, the plan's assumption, stops cooperating. Davis doesn't troubleshoot. He doesn't step back. He doesn't reassess. He draws his pistol and keeps moving. And behind him, men who had been pinned down for hours stand up and follow. Not because a manual told them to, but because one man demonstrated that impossible was negotiable. This isn't a story about a pistol. It's a story about what happens when doctrine meets mud and leadership refuses to. Want the manual answer? Wrong channel. Want to know what happens when the manual fails? Keep watching. Before there was a battlefield, there was a classroom. Charles Willis Davis. Born February 21st, 1917. Gordo, Alabama. Small town. Working-class family. He was headed toward a life built on rules. Case law, precedents, logic. The kind of world where the right answer exists, if you have enough time to find it. University of Alabama. Law school, second year. The professors saw potential. This young man thinks clearly under pressure. Clear thinking. That was Davis's skill. Not aggression, not charisma, clarity. He pitched for the Alabama baseball team. Middle rotation, not the hardest thrower, not the most talented. But he could put the ball exactly where he wanted it. Control, precision, methodical execution. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. Davis was 24. He had completed ROTC as an undergraduate, earned his commission as second lieutenant, infantry. He could have deferred, finished law school. The country needed lawyers too. But Davis calculated differently. The country had lawyers. What it needed was officers who could think clearly when everything went wrong. He reported to Fort Benning, Georgia, January 1942. Infantry Officer Basic Course. Tactics, weapons, leadership, map reading. Davis absorbed it the way he absorbed case law. Study the problem, understand the principles, execute consistently. He was not the most dynamic student, not the most aggressive, but he understood something fundamental. Infantry combat is about solving problems under pressure, and he had spent years training his mind to do exactly that. After Benning, Fort Sam Houston, Texas. There he met Joan Kirk, teacher, quiet, intelligent. They married June 1941. By December, they were in Hawaii. Davis assigned to the 25th Infantry Division, Schofield Barracks, Honolulu. Joan was pregnant, due early December. December 7th, 1941 changed everything. Davis was on perimeter defense at Fort Shafter when the Japanese attacked. Joan was at the barracks. She ran outside when the shooting started, dove for cover when Japanese planes strafed the buildings. December 8th, she gave birth to their daughter, Carol. Davis held his newborn for 10 minutes, looked at his wife, said nothing. What do you say when the world is at war and you are holding a child you might never see grow up? By November 1942, Davis was captain, executive officer, 2nd Battalion, 27th Infantry Regiment, the Wolfhounds, 25th Infantry Division. The division was deploying to Guadalcanal. Davis kissed his wife and daughter goodbye, boarded the transport, watched Hawaii disappear. He was 25 years old, a law student turned infantry officer, a man who understood that plans work until reality arrives. Reality was about to arrive. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, South Pacific. The island was a laboratory for failure. Dense jungle, steep ridges, heat that turned uniforms into rags, humidity that rusted weapons overnight, and constant wetness, rain, rivers, mud, condensation. Everything stayed wet. Everything. The United States had invaded August 1942, seized Henderson Field, the Japanese airstrip. The Japanese counterattacked again and again, trying to retake the field. By November 1942, the fighting had devolved into brutal jungle warfare. American forces pushing inland, Japanese forces defending every position. The 25th Infantry Division arrived in November. Fresh troops, reinforcements. Captain Davis stepped onto Guadalcanal and immediately understood nothing in his training had prepared him for this. The jungle was not a battlefield. It was an environment that destroyed assumptions. Visibility, 20 yards on a good day, 10 yards in thick vegetation. Movement, measured in yards per hour, cutting through vines, climbing over roots, wading through mud. Supply, everything carried on backs. Food, water, ammunition, medical supplies, and weapons. Weapons that collected moisture, that rusted, that jammed. The M1 Garand rifle was a magnificent weapon. Semi-automatic, 8-round clip, gas-operated, reliable in normal conditions. Normal meant dry. Normal meant clean. Normal meant European battlefields with mud you could wipe off. Guadalcanal had no normal. The island existed in a state of permanent wetness. Morning dew condensed on metal. Afternoon rain soaked through equipment. Evening humidity penetrated sealed cases. Night fog settled into mechanisms. A rifle cleaned at dawn would have moisture in the action by noon. Oil meant to prevent rust became a paste that collected dirt. The Garand's operating rod, its critical moving part, required clearance measured in thousandths of an inch. Guadalcanal's grit filled those spaces. Mud in the action, water in the barrel, condensation in the gas cylinder, rust on the operating rod. The weapon was designed for battlefields where you could maintain it, not jungles where maintenance was temporary and failure was inevitable. Soldiers learned to clean their weapons constantly, strip them, oil them, protect them in oiled cloth. But in jungle conditions, you could clean your rifle at sunrise and by midday it would collect enough moisture to malfunction. The environment defeated maintenance faster than maintenance could work. Davis's battalion moved inland, took positions northwest of Henderson Field, began patrolling. The Japanese were everywhere and nowhere. Snipers in trees, machine gun nests in vegetation, mortar positions in ravines. Combat was sudden, close range. Often the first side to shoot won. Davis learned the jungle's first lesson. Plans assume conditions. The jungle destroys conditions. Your map shows a trail. The trail is underwater. Your weapon is clean. It jams anyway. Your radio works until it doesn't. Everything that can fail will fail. The only question is when. By early January 1943, the 25th Infantry Division had orders to attack northwest, seize key terrain, push the Japanese back toward the coast. Objective? A series of ridge lines near the Guadalcanal River. One ridge was Hill 53, another the Seahorse, and one, because of its shape on the map, the Galloping Horse. January 10, 1943, the attack began. Davis's battalion advanced. Slow progress, heavy resistance. The Japanese were dug in, prepared positions, interlocking fields of fire. American casualties mounted. The advance slowed, stopped. By January 11th, the battalion was pinned at the base of Galloping Horse Ridge. Japanese on high ground, Americans in low ground, caught in crossfire, men dying. Attack failed. The colonel needed someone to carry orders to the forward companies, through the crossfire, through the kill zone. No one volunteered. Davis looked at the terrain, calculated the odds, raised his hand. "I'll go." At approximately 10 a.m., January 12th, Davis moved through the jungle alone, carbine in hand, orders in pocket. Japanese machine gun fire raked the area. Bullets tore through vegetation. Davis kept moving, using cover, timing movement between bursts. He reached the forward companies, delivered orders, supervised execution, then stayed. Spent the entire night with the forward units, most exposed position, under sporadic fire. Dawn, January 13th. Davis was still there, and the problem had not changed. Japanese still held high ground, Americans still pinned down. The battalion needed someone to lead an assault. No one volunteered. Davis raised his hand again. "I'll take them up." January 13th, 1943, approximately 8:30 a.m. Davis positioned himself at the base of the ridge. Behind him, approximately 40 soldiers from 2nd Company, exhausted, dehydrated, several showing signs of malaria. The ridge rose approximately 200 feet, steep slope, thick vegetation. Japanese positions at the crest. The logical assessment? This assault would fail. Same terrain, same defenses, tired men who had watched yesterday's attack get cut down. But Davis had calculated a different variable. What if someone went first? What if the men could see it was possible? He checked his M1 Garand, 8-round clip, loaded, safety off. He checked his .45 caliber pistol, 7-round magazine, loaded, holstered. Standard loadout, standard equipment, designed to work together. The rifle for range and volume, the pistol for backup and close quarters. The assumption, the rifle would fire when needed. Battle plans are built on assumptions. The weapon works, the radio connects, the map is accurate. War is what happens when assumptions fail. Davis started climbing. The ridge was steep. He used the rifle for balance, grabbed vines, pulled himself upward. Behind him, the sound of men following. Boots on mud, heavy breathing. Above, Japanese positions. Silent. Waiting. Davis climbed, 50 feet up, 75, 100, halfway to the crest. The Japanese machine guns opened fire. Type 92 heavy machine guns, 7.7 millimeter rounds, 450 rounds per minute, multiple guns, overlapping fields of fire. Bullets shredded vegetation, splintered branches. Behind Davis, men went down. Davis kept moving, upward, toward the guns. His training said this was suicide. His instincts said, run. His body said, survive. But his mind calculated, if you stop, they stop. If you run, they run. Keep moving. He reached a small rise, 20 feet from a machine gun nest. He could see them now. Sandbags, logs.
Two soldiers operating the weapon. Davis raised his M1 Garand, aimed at the gunner, squeezed the trigger. Click. The rifle jammed. First shot, first trigger pull, jammed. The sound, or rather the absence of sound, was unmistakable. Not the sharp crack of ignition, just the mechanical click of a firing pin striking nothing. In that moment, every assumption collapsed. The M1 Garand operates through gas pressure. When the round fires, expanding gas drives a piston. The piston drives the operating rod. The operating rod cycles the bolt. Extract, eject, load, lock. The entire system depends on that first round firing to begin the cycle. When the firing pin struck and nothing happened, the system was dead. The cause could have been anything. Moisture in the primer, dirt in the firing pin channel, condensation in the cartridge, a round that absorbed humidity during the climb and failed to ignite, or simply the statistical inevitability that in wet conditions, some percentage of ammunition will fail. It didn't matter why. What mattered, the weapon designed to fire 8 rounds without manual operation had refused to fire 1. The plan assumed the weapon would fire. The weapon refused. Davis had perhaps 2 seconds before the machine gunners saw him and adjusted fire. This is the mechanism of war, not the weapon's mechanism, the mechanism of failure. Everything can be perfect: training, positioning, timing, courage, and then a piece of metal says no. 7 pounds of steel, moisture in the action, grit in the bolt. The Garand's operating rod stuck in the wet Guadalcanal air. The plan died. Davis didn't freeze, didn't troubleshoot, didn't attempt to clear the jam. He dropped the rifle, drew his pistol. The .45 caliber M1911A1. Backup weapon. Short range. 7 rounds. Designed for close quarters and emergencies. This qualified as both. Davis raised the pistol. Fired. The recoil jolted his hand. The report sharp. He fired again. And again. The machine gun went silent. Davis didn't check the result. Didn't wait to see. He turned, looked down the slope at the men below. They had stopped, frozen, watching. Davis raised his pistol in one hand, waved with the other. "Come on!" Then turned and kept climbing. The men below hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. Then they charged. Not because of doctrine, not because of training, not because the plan worked, because the plan had failed, and one man kept moving anyway. That's the mechanism, not the weapon. The refusal to let failure be final.
Davis reached the crest of the knoll. More Japanese positions ahead. He fired his pistol. 3 rounds left. 2, 1, empty. He reloaded. 7 fresh rounds, kept advancing. Behind him, soldiers arrived, started throwing grenades, explosions, smoke, close quarters combat. Davis fired, shot a soldier at 5 feet, another at 3. The .45 caliber pistol was not designed for this. 7 rounds, effective range 50 meters. He was using it at 5. But effective range is a peacetime metric. War cares about what works, not what's designed. The Americans swarmed the position, rifles, bayonets, grenades. Within 5 minutes, the knoll was secured. Davis stood on the crest, reloading again, and realized something. He was silhouetted against the sky, visible from everywhere on the ridge. The military teaches you not to do this. Never skyline yourself. Never present a target visible against the horizon. Basic infantry doctrine, fundamental survival principle. But Davis hadn't planned to skyline himself. He had planned to assault with a rifle. The rifle had jammed. The pistol became primary. The advance continued, and physics placed him against the sky. Every American soldier along the entire Galloping Horse position could see him now. Not an officer giving orders from cover, not a commander directing from the rear, a captain standing in the open with a sidearm. On ground the Japanese had held for 3 days, firing at Japanese positions with a weapon designed for close quarters, waving men forward with his free hand, reloading in full view of both sides, still moving, still fighting. The visibility wasn't intentional, it was geometric. He reached the high ground, the sky was behind him, therefore he was visible. But intention doesn't matter to perception. What the battalion saw was simple. One officer, in the open, with a backup weapon, still advancing. For 3 days, those soldiers had been pinned down, exhausted, demoralized, convinced the ridge couldn't be taken, watching attacks fail, seeing men cut down before reaching halfway. The doctrine said, hold position, await support. Don't advance into machine gun fire without adequate preparation. Now they could see doctrine violated, could see one man demonstrating that the impossible position was being taken, that machine guns could be assaulted, that backup weapons could become primary, that movement uphill was survivable. What happened next wasn't in any manual. All along the ridge, American soldiers stood up. Tired men who hadn't moved in hours, sick men running on fever, dehydrated men who hadn't had water in 12 hours. They stood up, grabbed rifles, attacked. Not because of orders, not because of tactics, because if he could do it with a pistol, they could do it with rifles. The mechanism wasn't the weapon, it was the visibility, the presence, the demonstration that movement was still possible. Leadership under malfunction. Within 30 minutes, Hill 53 was under assault from 3 directions, and at that moment, a thunderstorm opened. Tropical downpour, rain, heavy, sudden. Soldiers turned faces skyward, opened mouths, drank, water, first in hours. Refreshed, re-energized. The American attack intensified. By noon, Hill 53 was secured. Japanese withdrew. Broken. American soldiers counted bodies. 170 Japanese casualties on and around Galloping Horse. American casualties, fewer than 100. The battle was over. Davis sat on muddy ground, pistol in hand, empty again. A sergeant approached. "Sir, are you hit?" Davis shook his head. "I don't think so." "Sir, what you did..." Davis looked at him. "What we did. You followed." But the sergeant was right. One rifle jam had changed the calculation. When the primary weapon failed, the backup became primary. When the plan collapsed, presence became the plan. That's the mechanism Guadalcanal taught. Assumptions fail. Weapons jam. Plans die. What survives is the refusal to stop moving. The official Medal of Honor citation. For distinguishing himself conspicuously by gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. On the 12th of January 1943, Major Davis, then captain, executive officer of an infantry battalion, volunteered to carry instructions to the leading companies of his battalion, which had been caught in crossfire from Japanese machine guns. On the following day, Major Davis again volunteered to lead an assault on the Japanese position, which was holding up the advance. When his rifle jammed at its first shot, he drew his pistol and, waving his men on, led the assault over the top of the hill. Electrified by this action, another body of soldiers followed and seized the hill. The citation was brief, 200 words. It documented the rifle jam, the pistol, the assault, the result. What it didn't document, the mechanism of failure that forced the decision, the wet conditions that jammed the Garand. The assumption collapsed that made a pistol the primary weapon. It said jammed as if that were a detail. But the jam was the entire story. Everything before the jam was doctrine. Everything after was improvisation. July 17, 1943, 5 months later. Major Charles Willis Davis stood in formation on Guadalcanal. Lieutenant General Millard F. Harmon pinned the Medal of Honor to his uniform. Brief ceremony, few words. Davis saluted, walked away. The medal was heavy, but not as heavy as the knowledge that his rifle had failed at the exact moment it was needed most. And he had survived anyway. Not because of superior equipment, not because of perfect execution, because when the weapon said no, he found another way. That's not in the manual. That's the opposite of the manual. The manual says, maintain your weapon, keep it clean, ensure it functions. The manual doesn't say, when it fails anyway, draw your pistol and charge uphill. But that's what Davis did, and 500 men followed. The war ended. Davis survived. Korea, Vietnam, multiple deployments, rising through ranks to colonel, Command and General Staff College, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, advanced military education, tactics, strategy, the theory behind warfare. The exam included a scenario: assault on fortified enemy position, enemy holding high ground, friendly forces pinned at base, machine gun crossfire. Question: what is the proper tactical solution? Davis read it twice. It was Galloping Horse. Different names, same problem. He wrote his answer based on what he actually did. Lead the assault, go first, draw fire, inspire follow-through. When exams were returned, most received satisfactory. Major Davis, the only man who had actually fought that exact scenario, received unsatisfactory. The instructor explained, the approved solution is different. He showed Davis the answer key. Flanking maneuver, artillery preparation, coordinated assault from multiple directions, textbook tactics, proper doctrine. The kind of solution that works when you have time, resources, and clear fields of fire. Sir, Davis said carefully, those resources weren't available on Guadalcanal. We had no artillery support for that sector, no time to flank. The terrain didn't allow coordinated assault from multiple directions. I understand your situation was difficult, Major. It's not about difficult. The approved solution assumes conditions that didn't exist. The instructor's expression didn't change. We teach doctrine, Major Davis. Doctrine is built on optimal conditions. Your situation required improvisation. My situation required what worked. And what worked violated proper tactical principles. Davis stared at the exam paper, at the red unsatisfactory marked across his answer, at the scenario that was his battle, described by men who had never been there. So the action that earned a Medal of Honor, Davis said slowly, would fail an exam? The instructor paused. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of institutional logic that has no good answer but must defend itself anyway. The Medal of Honor is awarded for personal valor, Major Davis. It recognizes extraordinary courage under fire. It has no direct relationship to tactical decisions in battle. Valor and doctrine are separate evaluations. Translation: you can be brave and wrong. Heroes don't always make correct tactical choices. We honor your courage while teaching proper procedure. Davis understood. The Army needed both. men brave enough to violate doctrine when necessary, and doctrine rigid enough to survive their absence. Davis stared. The battle he won violated the principles the Army taught. The assault that broke Japanese resistance was not the approved solution. The action that earned him the Medal of Honor would fail an exam. He kept the test, filed it away. A reminder, what works in war fails in peacetime systems. Theory and reality occupy different universes. The approved solution assumes conditions. Davis had learned assumptions fail. The approved solution assumes the weapon fires. Davis's rifle had jammed. The approved solution assumes time. Davis had men dying now. Doctrine is built on assumptions. War is what happens when assumptions collapse. And sometimes, the only correct answer is the one that has no justification except it worked. Charles Willis Davis died January 18, 1991. Age 73. Heart attack. San Francisco. Buried, Arlington National Cemetery. The Medal of Honor. The exam. The rifle jam. All of it carried to the grave. But the mechanism remains. Not the M1 Garand mechanism, not the .45 pistol mechanism, not the specific weapons or the specific ridge. The mechanism of leadership under failure. The pattern that survives the individual instance. When your primary tool fails, you use the backup. When the backup is insufficient, you use presence. When presence is all you have, you make it enough. When doctrine says stop, you calculate whether stopping serves the mission better than continuing. This isn't taught because it can't be taught. You cannot train someone to make the correct decision when their rifle jams at the worst possible moment. You cannot write a manual that says, when all assumptions fail, draw your pistol and charge anyway. Because sometimes that's the right answer, and sometimes it gets everyone killed. The difference is context, terrain, enemy strength, support available, morale. 1,000 variables that exist only in the moment. Davis had those variables. He calculated them in approximately 2 seconds, while a machine gun nest was 20 feet away. The calculation wasn't mathematical. It was intuitive. Built from months of jungle combat, from watching attacks fail and succeed, from understanding what his men could do and what they couldn't. He chose the pistol, not because doctrine recommended it, because in that specific moment, on that specific ridge, with those specific men watching, continuing with inferior firepower was superior to stopping with no firepower. That's the mechanism, not the weapon. The judgment under malfunction. The refusal to let mechanical failure become tactical failure. And 500 men learned it by watching one officer refuse to let his rifle jam end the assault. Galloping Horse Ridge still exists. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, Northwestern region. The jungle has reclaimed it. No markers, no monuments, just terrain where a law student from Alabama learned that plans assume conditions and war destroys conditions. Where doctrine met mud. Where assumptions met reality. Where a rifle jammed and a pistol became primary. And where the smallest mechanical failure forced the biggest tactical decision. 170 Japanese casualties. Fewer than 100 American. Hill 53 secured by noon. The numbers are documented. The battle is history. But the lesson remains. The weapon you planned to use will fail. The doctrine you studied will not apply. The conditions you assumed will not exist. What survives is the refusal to let failure stop movement. That's not taught. That's demonstrated. And on January 13th, 1943, one rifle jam demonstrated it to 500 men. Battle plans assume your weapon fires. War begins when it doesn't. January 13th, 1943. Galloping Horse Ridge. One rifle jam, one pistol, one decision. The mathematics were brutal. Uphill assault, machine gun fire, exhausted men, failed equipment. Every calculation said, stop. Every doctrine said, withdraw. Every assumption said, impossible. Davis raised a pistol and kept moving. Not because it was the right answer, because it was the only answer that refused to accept failure. And 500 men followed. Not the rifle, not the doctrine, not the plan. The refusal. That's the mechanism Guadalcanal taught. And 50 years later, the Army marked it unsatisfactory. Because what wins in war fails in peacetime systems. What breaks assumptions breaks doctrine. What survives reality cannot pass theory's test. Captain Charles Willis Davis, the law student who learned that clarity means nothing when your weapon jams. The officer who charged uphill with a backup weapon. The soldier who won the battle and failed the exam. The smallest failure, the biggest decision, and the mechanism that remains. When everything designed to work stops working, keep moving anyway. If you made it this far, you understand why these stories matter. Drop a comment. Where are you from? Anyone serve? More mechanisms, more failures, more decisions that doctrine cannot teach. Colonel Davis held Galloping Horse Ridge with a pistol, then failed an exam on how he did it. That's the weight of reality. That's the price of improvisation. That's what happens when war refuses to follow the manual. End of report.
Was it the right decision?
The exam said no. The battle said yes. Comment below, doctrine or reality? Which one matters? More stories where the manual stops working coming soon. Stay.